Well, I think we'll make a start. It's a great pleasure to welcome everybody to the Warburg Institute's Directors Seminar. I'm the director, Bill Sherman, and it's a huge privilege to host Professor Sabine Frommel and celebrate her new book, produced in collaboration with Professor Jean-Guillaume on Leonardo da Vinci and architecture, just published about a month ago by Brill. Now, the name Leonardo da Vinci and the subject of architecture have always been given a good home here at the Warburg Institute. Not everybody knows, but the very, very first public lectures that A.B. Warburg gave in Hamburg in 1899 were on the subject of Leonardo, and we published them in English for the first time a few years ago to mark the centenary of Leonardo's death, the 500th anniversary. It's an institute that's probably more associated with art than architecture, but don't forget that this is the institute where Rudolf Wittkower wrote his seminal study of Renaissance architecture. Hi, Simona. And also where Frances Yates produced her most famous text, The Art of Memory, so beloved of so many modern architects. We're very fortunate to have Professor Frommel here to share some highlights from the new book. After all, few people have done more to shape our knowledge of architecture in the age of Leonardo. Many of you will already know her work on Sebastiano Serlio, subject of her PhD and first book, her more recent work on Sangallo, her studies of grottos, of temples, of the historiography of architecture itself. And her approach in all of these is Warburgian in method as well as in subject, paying rigorous and resourceful attention to the migrations of ideas across disciplinary and international borders. So before I hand over to Sabine, I would like to ask one of our PhD students, Goran Vukovic, to offer a few words of introduction because it was his request that made this visit possible. So Goran, over to you.
Thank you. It's both a pleasure and an honor to say a few introductory words to Professor Sabine Frommel lecture. The links between the Warburg Library and art historians in France stretch back to more than a century. To the time of Henri Faucillon and Jean Seznec. I'm thrilled that we are able to carry on that dialogue with Professor Frommel, who is Director of Studies for Renaissance Art at the Sorbonne's École Pratique, as well as Director of Research at the Institut National d'Histoire de l'Art in Paris. This evening, she will share her insights into Leonardo's architectural legacy, a subject as elusive as it is profound. Her talk promises not only to trace the chronology and typology of Leonardo's architectural thought, but also to examine its sources, patterns of assimilation, and lasting legacy. An inquiry, I believe, well suited to our shared interest in cultural interconnectedness. So please join us in welcoming Professor Sabine Frommel to the Warburg Institute. Sabine, the floor is yours.
I feel very honored to be here this evening, and I would like to thank Professor Sherman for this invitation, and also Goran Vukovic and John Millington for his help. Leonardo da Vinci left several hundred architectural drawings, mostly simple sketches, rarely accompanied by written inscriptions and often interwoven with each other. This graphic production, representing different stages of his thought processes. It's better, so? Oh, okay. I start again? So this graphic production, representing different stages of his thought processes, remains a challenge for the discipline of architectural history. Some of his drawings can be linked to identifiable projects, but most of them are related to personal research on subject that interested the artist. Central plans, churches, palaces and villas, fortifications, the ideal city, multiple staircases, ephemeral architecture, garden design, and so on. Fortunately, a lot of these drawings can be dated thanks to the seminal work of Carlo Pedretti and also other scholars. In the dialogues that Leonardo maintained with his patrons, some of which developed and intensified over a long of time, his reflections on architecture were often combined with his interests, and again, interest in the field of arts, interest also in the field of technical problems, military strategies, hydraulic systems, sculpture, theatrical scenography, or anatomical studies. This permeability between the different genres is one of the most significant aspects of Leonardo's production and points to the inexhaustible scope of his imagination. Exchanges with the most important patrons, Ludovico Sforza, Cesare Borgia, Charles d'Amboise, Pier Soderini, Giuliano de' Medici, Francis I, enabled him to develop and to express the complexity of his thoughts in ever-changing combinations and forms. It is important to clarify when and how Leonardo's interest in architecture was awakened and which prototypes made a lasting impression on him. Unfortunately, his dialogue with his first patron, in reality, it was not, unfortunately, his first patron, Lorenzo de' Medici, is poorly documented. From the early 1480s, the Lord of Florence, or Lorenzo de' Medici, developed a strong interest in the art of building, like his grandfather, Cosimo the Elder. Lorenzo was to draw up projects that inaugurated a renewal of architectural typologies, such as the sanctuary of Santa Maria delle Carceri in Prato, here the inner room with the cupola, and also his own villa of Poggio a Caiano. In doing so, he followed Leon Battista Alberti, a close friend of the family and the rules in his treatise De Re Edificatoria, the first modern treatise on architecture, which had been published in 1485, thanks to the financial support of Lorenzo. The church in Prato is, in fact, the first sacred building in the shape of a Greek cross that fully complies with the canon and the harmonious proportions, while the villa of Lorenzo, the villa of Poggio a Caiano, is of a centralized plan and has a pediment colonnade and introduced to the sacralization of private buildings. It seems, however, and here also a plan of the same villa of Poggio a Caiano, I will come back to this a little bit later. But it seems that the interest of Leonardo for architecture developed from painting. In the early 1480s, he designed, everybody knows about this, the Adoration of the Magi for the Augustinian convent of San Donato a Scopeto. In no other painting he did devote so much attention to an architectural setting documented in 2 drawings. It's the first held in the Louvre on the right hand. You can see it there. We can see a structure resembling to an ancient ruin with 2 parallel ramps. I hope you can recognize this, similar to the temple of Claudius in Rome. So it's really an extraordinary example of Leonardo's interest for Roman antiquity. Workers are shown here. I hope this is a little size. All the drawings of Leonardo are like stamps, very, very little size. So I hope that you can recognize the details I want to show. Workers are busy. One can see groups of workers, while the Holy Family is in front of a hybrid construction in the foreground, consisting of a simple wooden frame at the right side, and at the left, in an elegant architectural order with pilasters that frame blind arcades decorated by elegant scallop shell conches, and we have a type of symbolic roof also in a simple wood construction. Leonardo seems to be interested, so we did a little graphical reconstruction of this little bit strange building. Leonardo seems to have been interested in Vitruvius' evolutionary concept, whereby all architectural orders can be traced back to the wooden hut, the starting point for the development of more sophisticated forms. In the Uffizien drawing, the ruin is now on the left side, and one of the workers, you can see the poor worker here, is risking his safety while trying to attach the roof to the trunk of a tree to consolidate the tent protecting the building site. It is a building site here. More explicitly than in the drawing of the Louvre, the laborers are working, but it is difficult to understand whether they are restoring a classical monument, since newborn Christian religion lacked an own monumental tradition, or if they are constructing a new one. However, one can note a connection also with contemporary architecture, that is a reconstruction of the architectural setting, But what is more important is the connection with Lorenzo's villa at Poggio a Caiano, which had been planned in the same time, probably by a competition, because Vasari says there were a lot of architects preparing projects and to discuss with Lorenzo de' Medici. So we have the similar ramps and stair ramps and arcades, and so the painting could signify the glorification of Lorenzo de' Medici as a patron of the art and promoter of monuments of Roman antiquity. Oh, no, don't worry. All in all, the 17 years spent from 1482 in the service of the Duke of Sforza were the most consistent and probably the most fulfilling period of Leonardo's career. The French occupation and the capitulation of Lodovico in 1499 marked the end of this glorious time. In a letter to the Duke, Leonardo boasts of his wide range of skills. Again, fortifications, defense by provisional equipment, such as wooden bridges, splendid private and public buildings, feast and theater. These years shared with Bramante, the future architect of Julius II, and show clearly his preferences and methods, which are deeply rooted in Florentine tradition. Let's have a look on his project for the competition of the Tiburio, the achievement of the dome of the Milan Cathedral. In this competition design, one of his more detailed projects, which he designed as a cupola with a double shell modeled on Brunelleschi's cupola of the Cathedral of Florence, naturally did not convince the builders, because the patrons wanted a real Tiburio pattern, a typical pattern of architecture in Milan and in the Lombardy, but not a monumental image of the tradition of Florence. The ideal projects and centralized church, and I show some reconstructions again of the Tiburio of the cathedral. We did this for the exhibition which took place in Montreal, Leonardo, architect and engineer, in 89. So you can recognize, I think this is really a typical pattern from Tuscany, with no idea what could be the right decision in Milan accordingly to the local tradition. So the ideal projects of drawn, which Leonardo conceived in Milan, are very, very known. So we have centralized churches, and we have the ideal city. Here is one of the most famous drawings of the ideal city, with 2 levels, drawings that had been studied intensively. As for the ideal city, which is a part of the Prince strategy of glorification, we can note that a very, very important role played the treatise from Filarete, the ideal city of Sforzinda, which the compatriot Filarete had dedicated to both Medici and the Forza, and has been noted that as for the centralized churches, this is a very, very important compendium of an important number of idealized plans and representations of the centralized church. The influence is very, very heterogeneous and combines, again, Florentine influence, late antiquity in Milan, mainly San Lorenzo, and the oriental type of the quincunx. To better illustrate Leonardo's understanding of antiquity, one of the idealized projects in the manuscript B, the manuscript which had been conceived between 1487 and 19, is very interesting because it combines in a new way a Roman amphitheater with a Christian church called by Leonardo Teatro da Predicare. So again, we can note an interest of Leonardo for the architecture of the Roman antiquity. So Leonardo thus takes a stand in the debate about the location of the altar. That's a highly important topic in this moment when the patrons and the architects try to conceive a new typology of the sacred building. A main preoccupation during the Renaissance, or the Renaissance, that on one hand, the coincidence between the geometric and the liturgical center is an idea of the Renaissance, uniting prayers around the altar. On the other hand, the latter as a culminating point of the main axis, that's another topic, near the apse is recommended by Leon Battista Alberti. Relative unknown, however, are his designs for centralized private buildings. And here we could note that Francesco di Giorgio, a very, very famous architect and engineer from Siena, who came also to Milan to conceive projects for the problem of the achievement of the cathedral. Francesco di Giorgio and Leonardo met in Milan and in Pavia in 1490, and we know that Leonardo obtained pages from the treatise of Francesco di Giorgio on military architecture. But his influence on Leonardo's drawings of palaces and villas had been noted only very, very recently. For instance, let's see some examples. So here you see one of the sheet of Francesco di Giorgio's treatise with all these idealized forms and patterns of a villa, of a house, of a residence, and so on, all conceived in a very, very strong geometrical methodology. And here we can see that Leonardo ties to such system, for instance, here in a project from about 1490 for a palace where we can see the same type of schematic use of the octagonal forms here in the corners of the palace. And he proposed again such a geometrical pattern in his project of the reconstruction of the quarter in Florence nearby the Church of San Lorenzo, the mausoleum of the Medici. Here you can see it again on the left side, and the prototype of Francesco di Giorgio on the right side, and again and again and again up to the end of his career when he worked in France between 1516 and 19, he continued to develop variations of the same type of idealized palace of Francesco di Giorgio. A main topic for Leonardo was the center of the private house. So not only the center of the church, also the center of the private house. And so the sinus, accordingly to Alberti, the metaphor for the piazza, the focal point of in the town, the piazza, in the house, the sinus, the focal point of social life, where all roads and axes lead and people gather, was a very, very important point for Leonardo. And here again, it is the tradition from Florence. It is again Lorenzo de' Medici and his architect Giuliano da Sangallo. Leonardo studied Alberti's treatise, at least in the form of vulgar translations. He had almost no knowledge of Latin. He had a little knowledge. And so there are a lot of misunderstandings also. And so he could try to read these translations, but he could also see in which way the idea of the scenos, or the center of the house, had been developed and had been conceived in the milieu of Lorenzo de' Medici, adopted by Giuliano da Sangallo. Giuliano da Sangallo and Lorenzo de' Medici worked together. You can see here in the middle of this plan L Magnifico Lorenzo. So this probably had been an idea by Lorenzo de' Medici. He had a very, very good culture and knowledge of antiquity. And it's this villa, a wooden model of this villa, had been presented in 1494 in Vigevano to the court of Ludovico Sforza, and Vasari said it also. Leonardo and Giuliano da Sangallo met in Vigevano in this occasion. I guess that Giuliano took advantage of the opportunity to talk about the renewal, because there is very, very high dimension of theory of architecture, Vitruvius, Alberti, how to create new architecture, which takes in consideration the principles of Vitruvius, but also to make them fit with contemporary exigencies and functions. So I guess that Giuliano talked a lot about this theory, and showing also other of his projects. He left a very big number of drawings, his own projects and drawings from antiquity, and so on, talking probably mainly also of the Villa Reale, Poggio Reale nearby Naples. That is for the House of Aragon, another project probably conceived by Lorenzo and by Giuliano. Anyhow, the central space of the building became a main topic of Leonardo in his project since his first stay in Milan. From 1491 to 1493 dates a drawing from the Biblioteca Nazionale di España that shows the central space crowned by a dome. Here one can see the dome. One can see there's always all the little drawings. It's not easy to analyze. It's not easy to develop an idea what does this mean, and in which way such an architecture can work, can function. A little later, and here detail of these little drawings from Spanish, I wondered whether what really, again, what could this mean? I think it is a typical centralized villa. It's not a very beautiful sketch, but helps put a little bit what in which way Leonardo had conceived, and what was his idea of this imaginary building. Another drawing is a little bit later, 1504-6, an unexplored drawing in red chalk, again held in Madrid, is crowned by a dome that remembers the Lombard Tiburio. Here Leonardo remembered what is Tiburio, so the dome crowning the cathedral. Unfortunately, like in so many cases, the annotations on the sheet doesn't help us to learn more from the drawing. Is it a religious building? Is it a villa? Unfortunately, this texts refers to other problems, to other buildings, and often to really other things, often technical things. So during the same period, Leonardo, this is during the second stay in Milan under the French rule, he conceived also a project, really a project for the representative of Francis I in Lombardy, Charles d'Amboise, nearby Milan. So one had a palace in the town and a villa nearby the town. And so Leonardo proposed again for centralized villa. You see it here. But it seems that the patron was not very convinced of this idea. But he preferred a longitudinal and more convenient distribution, which was more in keeping with his own tradition. And one can note this little drawing here. So here, the centralized villa, and here the longitudinal version. So this sheet reflects a real dialogue between Leonardo and his patron, the steps from an idealized form of the villa to a plan that takes in consideration practical living conditions. In any case, an ever-increasing permeability between sacred and private buildings that can be observed in the milieu of Lorenzo de' Medici is a highly important topic, and again, a little drawing to reconstruct what could have been meant with this little drawing. But the permeability, you can see it also in the ideal project of a villa of the manuscript B in Paris, where we have again a villa, but a villa adorned by a Serliana and crowned by now again a tiburio, what is a typical feature of religious architecture. So we can note very good in this drawing in which way sacred patterns and typical patterns of a villa crossed here. The important, a very, very important moment of the evolution of Leonardo's vision of architecture was his stay in Rome in 1505, confirmed by an annotation dated 15th of April 1505 in here on this sheet, on the inside back cover of the Codex of the Flight of the Birds, and by a payment on 30 April per gabella d'uno suo fardello, di sue veste fatto venire da Roma. So he sent some personal things from Rome to Florence. Precise documentation is lacking, but this brief stay could have been linked with specific plans. On April 28th, Michelangelo received the order of the freestanding tomb of Julius II. At the same time, Bramante succeeded in convincing the Pope to construct a central plan building for the new Temple of Solomon, the future St. Peter's, which we know thanks to the plan GDSU, Gabinetto dei Disegni delle Stampe number 1 in Florence, which you can see and above the reconstruction of this building. The monumental sepulchre was to be placed in the choir here, this place for Michelangelo's tomb. Absolutely unusual idea to place the tomb of the Pope in the choir. So when Leonardo arrived in Rome in the middle of April, the debates had entered in a decisive phase moment. And the idea of a mausoleum as an autonomous monument nearby St. Peter's, which had been imagined by Giuliano da Sangallo, was definitely ruled out. It is not known. if Leonardo was called by the Pope, accordingly to an advice of Bramante, they worked together in Milan, or if Bramante needed to convince the Pope of this idea of the centralized building, he desired to continue the fruitful dialogue from Milan and like to have a rhetorically gifted supporter to push through the idea of the central building, which ultimately could not be reconciled with the functional requirements of the most important Christian church. You see it today, St. Peter's, very, very huge nave. So some of Leonardo's sketches from this time in Milan support this hypothesis even further, so that he had been called to Rome to share the debate around the form of the future St. Peter's and to conceive some project. You can see it here. We have the plan from Bramante and we have sketches from Leonardo. I think it is easy to see that the things are very, very similar. So let's now see a little bit the drawing. This drawing from spring 1505 probably, which is very, very important to see Leonardo's evolution. At the top left of this drawing, and here, you can see some details, and these are variations on details of the order of Bramante's Palazzo Caprini from 1501, which testify to Leonardo's interest in his colleagues' recent architectural inventions. So again, and here you have Palazzo Caprini had been destroyed, but I think so we can have a good idea of the character of this building. The detail overlap with a villa, which is also documented by a plan. The facade is characterized by the combination of an attic and a pediment, links, so specific characteristics of the two most prominent ancient prototypes, the temple, the pediment, and the triumphal art, that is the attic. Such a combination is archaeologically incorrect. It is related, however, to Giuliano da Sangallo's project from the same year for the loggia of the trumpeters at St. Peter's, and Giuliano used the same combination of attic and pediment also for the reconstruction of triumphal arches of his Libri degli Archi del Codice Barberiano. Bramante, Giuliano da Sangallo. But the drawings of Leonardo points also to other inspirations, and there is again this same sheet. Baldassare Peruzzi. Baldassare Peruzzi is a pupil of Francesco di Giorgio and overlooked was until now the little plan in the lower part, you see it here, a dwelling with an elongated structure featuring, characterized by projections in the corners reminiscent to Agostino Chigi's suburban house, the Villa Farnesina, whose construction began in 1506. Leonardo could have seen drawings or a wooden model of the project of this spectacular design. The influence is visible again, and so it is really an interaction between Leonardo and Peruzzi in the drawings of the villa of Charles d'Amboise that I showed already, mentioned before. we can also see the similar organization of the building. It is not astonishing that Leonardo was also influenced by Michelangelo's interventions. He knew very well Michelangelo, and he followed during his stay in Rome also the drawings for the tomb of Julius II. And we can see in another project from Leonardo during the second stay, we can see Bramante's Tempietto, the more important building of significant building of the Roman Renaissance. And we can see also figures which records directly, and here a detail of such a figure of the tomb of Trivulzio, which records the dialogue between architecture and sculpture and also the particular character of the sculptures of the drawings of the tomb of Julius II from Michelangelo, the slave from the Louvre, which everybody knows. So the second stay in Rome between 1513 and 16, I show the school of Athens. There is always a big discussion if Leonardo is represented as Plato here, but it is not our problem. I think this fresco is so typical and so significant for this time. After the expulsion from the French from Lombardy in 1512, Leonardo left Milan and returned to Florence, where he found a new patron, Giuliano de' Medici, the youngest son of Lorenzo de' Medici and brother of the newly appointed Pope Leo X. He came to Rome, where he got an apartment with a studio in the villa of Belvedere. There he devoted himself to his research but gave up painting, perhaps because he could not longer compete with Michelangelo and Raphael, and was also less interested in architecture. As an expert in construction methods and static system, he was not appointed to the gigantic building site of St. Peter's. After Bramante's death, the task fell to Raphael, who was still inexperienced in this field. And his project for the reconstruction of the quarter of San Lorenzo district, I showed it already, with a church facade. I will not insist on this facade in this lecture because it had been studied intensively. So there are little things. As for architecture, we have some little, I don't know why is this cut, but there are some drawings which shows that the rhythm of the facades became more differentiated. These triumphal motifs, rhythmic bay, it was now an important pattern, important motive, as also in Giuliano da Sangallo's Città Ideale from Baltimore. But little news about architecture, and we have to wait that Leonardo accepted the invitation from Francis I to go to France to live in the nearby the castle of Amboise, and to had now new projects like the castle of Romorantin. But the same thing, very difficult for him to learn about local traditions, but the inventions, the new patterns, the new language of Bramante in Rome was very, very important for him. So we have big perspectives. We have strongly geometrical, organized buildings with interactions, with gardens and with water. So I think that's very, very important to see in which way his Roman experience worked and helped him to elaborate new patterns. So we have perhaps to a little bit to try to clarify, is Leonardo an architect? So he never built. He's a method for architecture. And I think there are some points to underline. This way to represent the building as a plan and a bird's eye representation, Leonardo is the only one to do this. And this makes understand that he is highly interested in function and is highly interested in the plastic values of a building. There are always this interconnection between anatomical drawings and his studies of architecture. Sometimes one has the impression that he works from one field to the other. Architecture can be inspired by anatomic drawings and by studies of the human body. He has also a very rational method that we can see here. That is the design of a church where we have a plan and we have an elevation and we have a perspective. So it's a kind of triade, three representations to make understand a building. And that is the method that had been underlined by Raphael in his famous letter to Leo, the 10th of 1819. One can also observe in which way he conceives a building that are the clean stables of the Medici. And at the left side, you see a very, very symmetrical drawing. So he clarifies the functions. He clarifies also the relation between the different parts of a building. And as a second step, he will study now more detail and also the artistic, the stylistical language and the significance of this truth he will then develop. And he is doing surveys, like all the architects of this time, surveys of antique buildings, but also of modern buildings, so Brunelleschi's Santa Maria degli Angeli e Santo Spirito, that are sources of inspiration, or more recent buildings, like here details of the Palazzo Ducale at Urbino when he worked for Cesare Borgia in 1502. So I think there's a lot of methods, also the model, the wooden model that he conceived for the competition in Milan, the wooden model, and it was for him really a tool to deepen and to develop his different details of this construction, which we saw before. Now, at the end, I would very, very quickly, I know the time is advancing, analyze the other point. Could Leonardo also have an influence on the masters? That is a very, very important point, it seems to me. So is this possible that these little drawings could have an influence on other architects of this time? I think yes. A first example which I would like to show you is Francesco di Giorgio, its adoration in Sant'Agostino in Siena, where we find the same type of this hybrid building, half a wooden construction and half a more elegant construction with an architectural order. I remember here the drawing of the Adoration of the Magi, and I show again the reconstruction and the interpretation, perhaps we could see, of Francesco di Giorgio. Then we talked a lot of Baldassare Peruzzi. And it is certainly not a coincidence that his pupil of Francesco di Giorgio, Baldassare Peruzzi also took an interest in Leonardo's unusual architectural talent. We learned that the two of them met in Rome. I showed this. And we learned also the similarities with, between the Farnesina and Leonardo's project for Charles d'Amboise. But following the footsteps of Francesco di Giorgio, Peruzzi shared with Leonardo the interest of the fortified villa. That is a hybrid between a building with military equipment and the advantages of a villa with lodgers and charming interplay between inside and outside. In doing so, Peruzzi was inspired of Leonardo's centralized version of the design of the villa of Charles d'Amboise. And it takes very little. So you see Peruzzi and Leonardo, I think it is, one can recognize it is very, very similar. And it takes little to transform the quadrangular floor into a rectangular one, thereby expanding the interior layout and creating a series of habitable rooms. Both of them, Leonardo and Peruzzi, were impressioned by Francesco di Giorgio's schematical plans in the Codex Mediabecchiano, which I showed a little bit before at the beginning. And a drawing from Peruzzi shows that also he conceived all these variations of the plans from the Codice Mediabecchiano here destined for churches. And I think this comparison makes it clear that there is a development from Filarete, his pupil Francesco di Giorgio, Leonardo Peruzzi, that is really an interaction between these two artists. We can also find a facade of a palace from Peruzzi where it seems to hesitate between an attic and a pediment. So this idea to combine two antique prototypes seems to have had a role also for Peruzzi. Antonio da Sangallo the Younger, strongly influenced by his uncles Giuliano and Antonio the Elder, also reworked Leonardo's models, as we have already noted. One of the first testimonies is the staircase of Palazzo Medici in Rome. I'm talking about this staircase. This is a new project, much more characterized by open relationships between the interiors and exteriors, like the former one of his uncle Giuliano da Sangallo. And here can we see a sheet of Leonardo, where we have the same type of staircase. And here again, a comparison. Leonardo's staircase, the staircase of Leonardo's Villa di Charles d'Amboise nearby Milan, and here the same type of organization and orchestration of the Piazza Madama of Antonio da Sangallo. Another drawing of Antonio at the right side for a Villa Ferretti at the beginning at the 1540. And again, Leonardo's design for Palazzo Medici. I think it is clear that there is some relationship, or here the design for the Villa of Charles d'Amboise again, and another project of Antonio da Sangallo. And the same is right to see to end this idea to show an evolution between the different architects and to give a role to Leonardo in the Teatro da Predicare. The drawing from Leonardo we saw already. and another one of Antonio da Sangallo, where we can recognize again a very, very similar form. Here it is now not the steps of Roman amphitheaters, but the Stalle or the monastery of Monte Moro here in Monte Fiascone, where we have also a circular form with two altars in the middle. So Michelangelo hated Leonardo. But around 1516, he went to his bottega, where the unfinished tomb of Julius II was located, and advised him to turn the head of Moses to the left to intensify the facial expression. An interest in his work and knowledge of some of his drawings can therefore be assumed. So Michelangelo knew some drawings, certainly some drawings from Leonardo, as showed by Leonardo's drawing of a portal which combines a segmented and a triangular pediment. Here you can see it. It's also an evolution of this solution. It's a very, very interesting drawing showing really the genesis of architectural form of Leonardo. And we remember, I'm very, 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 very sorry for this awful photo of the Biblioteca Laurentiana, but I did what I could, but I was not able to find a better one. I think here one can recognize it is the same play between two different forms of pediments which had been used there. The realized motif of the monumental scale makes it possible to better understand the complexity of the projections and the recesses of Leonardo's drawing. It is difficult to decide if Michelangelo knew about Leonardo's ideal projects of churches with an altar in the center, but in 1559 in San Giovanni dei Fiorentini, different drawings reveal that he was hesitating between a setting up of the altar in the heart of the building, you can see on the left side, to place it in a rear chapel, tying to the tendency of the convergence of the geometrical and liturgical center, but obviously afraid to overwhelm the inner cylinder. Around 1530, this was not the problem of the author of a drawing of the Codex Plumshansky held in Praga. He is again inspired from Francesco di Giorgio's geometric systems. He placed now the altar in the center under the dome. What is it about this Codex Plumshansky? It had been studied very well. It is possible that Giulio Romano brought graphic materials gathered in the Eternal City to Mantua, where he worked in 1524. A complex variation of the villa of Charles d'Amboise from Leonardo is also here in the same codex. It is not the hand or the calligraphy of Giulio Romano, but it seems that this idealized project had been drawn by another artist in the same milieu, but we recognize again the villa from Charles d'Amboise, which I have shown for several times, a longitudinal hall flanked by loggias, translated now in a more differentiated group of rooms. Through Peruzzi, some prototypes reached also Serlio's treatise, but this would take us too far afield here. I hope that these examples suffice to show that Leonardo is not an isolated phenomenon in architectural history of the Renaissance. He drew inspiration from the most important masters of his time, Filarete, Bramante, Giuliano da Sangallo, Francesco di Giorgio, and Baldassare Peruzzi, and used the method of variation or reinventation of prototypes. Apart from the castle of Romorantin, no groundbreaking architectural design emerged from this. Much remained committed to archaic character, probably because Leonardo, as an architect, is it an architect, is not an architect? This is a point of a discussion, was not under any open competitive pressure. On the other hand, his ideas and drawings influenced masters like Peruzzi, Antonio da Sangallo the Younger, Giulio Romano, and perhaps also Michelangelo. So this impact thus extended far beyond the Florentine network with its own collective imaginary. The fact that his concepts were taken up and communicated, and that he played a role in the intensive debate about the renewal of architecture, is perhaps linked to his more universal view of architecture that was able to convey essential ideas on profound questions in his concise sketches. Thank you.